Hymn number 453, 453.
I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore. Very deeply sank within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my tearing cry. From the water lifted me, not safe and alive. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, lifted even me, when else could help. Love lifted me. All my life to Him I give, ever to Him I cling. In His blessed presence live, ever His praises sing. Love so mighty and so true, merits my soul's best song. Faithful, loving service to Him belong. Love lifted even me, love lifted even me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted even me, love lifted even me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. So did nature look above, Jesus completely saved. He will lift you by His love out of the angry wave. He's the master of the sea, built His will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. Love lifted even me, love lifted even me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted even me, love lifted even me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me.
Hymn number 611, 611.
Walking in sunlight on my journey, over the mountains through the vale. Jesus has said, I'll never forsake thee. Promise me mine and never can fail. Heavenly sunlight, heavenly light, lighting my soul with Hallelujah, I'm rejoicing, singing His praises, Jesus is mine. Shadows around me, shadows above me, never conceal my Savior and God. He is the light in the darkness, ever unfolding, close to His side. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing His praises. Jesus is mine. In the bright sunlight, every rejoicing, pressing my way to mansions of love. Singing His praises, glad I'm walking, walking in sunlight, sunlight of love. Heavenly sunlight, heavenly sunlight, lighting my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing His praises, Jesus is mine.
The song after the lesson will be hymn number 903. 90.
Before I begin my lesson, I'd like to go back on the announcements just a moment. Randy did call me this evening and say that Connie was under the weather, maybe even was thinking about taking her to urgent care or something. He didn't get into the specifics of the issue, but Connie Henry may well be at urgent care as I speak. I don't know. But that was earlier this evening, okay? So Connie Henry. Counsel for Better Living. Boy, that sounds like something you want to get in on, huh? For some of us, it's kind of late, isn't it? When I was working from time to time, I would go off on, they would have symposiums, solution mining. Solution mining is not very many people know very much about it because very few people actually do it. And I spent a career solution mining, so I can go sometimes. The company would send me to symposiums, and I did it at the feet of some pretty educated people. Educated people are not necessarily where sometimes you want to sit because you can get confused. But you knew, or at least I did, because of my time in that business, when I was listening to somebody who knew what they're talking about, okay? I knew it. They didn't have to say very much before I figured out that this guy's been there, he's done it. He's somebody that you can pay attention to. And that's always good to do. And I like to do that. And I hope tonight that that's what you're doing. Not me now. Oh, no, not me. I'm just going to point out what has been said, okay? I'm going to go to, as I had announced, to Ecclesiastes, the 7th chapter. Of course, there's 29 verses in that chapter. I'm not fixing to go there. I'll be lucky if I get 10 or 12 verses, okay? So good enough. But let me read this before we get started. I want you to hear this. This is what the Bible tells us about Solomon. And I'm reading from 1 Kings, the 4th chapter, beginning in verse 29. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the men of the East and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than any other man, and on and on and on he goes. And I'll stop there with the reading. You're not sitting at the feet of somebody tonight that don't know what they're talking about. This man experienced some things, and not only had he experienced these things, but he was drawing from a wisdom that God gave him. So there are things that we can learn at the feet of Solomon that I think are certainly good, and there's a lot that can be said about that. But the fact that Ecclesiastes is part of the scriptures says enough, does it not? The 7th chapter, the first few verses, almost appear to shallow thinking paradoxical. When you read it and look at it, that can't be. Are we sure he said that? But I couched it now with shallow thinking, and that's where we kind of operate. I'm not trying to be ugly, but we kind of get superficial. Tonight's lesson and what he's going to be talking about, we can't be superficial. He's going to pull you out of that. He's addressing something here in the 7th chapter, at least the early part, that I'll be dealing with. He's dealing with, that is Solomon, the big picture of life. You need to understand that. The big picture. What really matters, what really counts. And so if you into small things, it'll probably pass over your head. I hope that doesn't happen. It's worth stopping and thinking about, and that's what I hope to try to do tonight with this lesson if I can. So let's get started. Now, obviously, we'll start with verse 1. Solomon says that honor is better than luxury. Now, what he's talking about when he talks about luxury is he's talking about riches. He's talking about wealth. He's talking about money. He's talking about land. You figure it out. Now, he says in the verse, a good name is better than precious ointment. But with that, he's couching that as being wealthy, well-to-do, well-off, lots of things. And he's telling us there in as plain language as can be said that a good name, listen to me, young men, I have the boys are in here, and I'm going to be talking to them. This is good things for you to consider and focus in on. A good name is better than money. Can I say that and get away with it? Look at Proverbs. Again, probably the same author, as that he didn't write everything in Proverbs, but he likely this. He says a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver or gold. A good name is just priceless. What am I talking about? And what's he talking about when he says a good name? Someone who walks up and down the street and people look up to you, not because you have money, we'll deal with that in a little bit, but because you are honorable, because you do things that God-fearing, God-loving people would do. You don't do things contrary to God's will. You can be counted on in a lurch. You'll pay your bills. You'll earn your keep. You'll do all the things that good, upright people will do. And you may not have a dollar in your pocket, but your name is honorable. That's what he's talking about. That's what matters. We get off sometimes chasing a dollar and working overtime and chasing a dollar, and somehow or another it rises to great importance in us. And the wisest man on earth here tells us that a good name is what you want to be working toward. Oh, we can follow it with riches. He didn't say don't try to work, earn money. Look up there. Look at the 4th word. No, it's the 5th word in that verse, 7:1. What's the 5th word? What is it, somebody? Better. That's what he's saying. Yeah, he talks about it's good to earn money. You can turn over to Ecclesiastes 3rd chapter, and he'll talk about earning money and earning your keep and paying your bills and stepping up and being a man, or a woman, I guess, and enjoying it. But here he's talking about that big picture, what really matters. It's an honorable name. Why is this so? Well, Ecclesiastes 2:18 and 19, he says this, yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. This is one of the reasons why he says it's silly. What he's saying here is I've gathered up all this money, and then I die, and who does it fall to? Read on. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. How silly, how shallow of thinking, when all we do is go after a dollar bill, and we let more important things slip and slide and get away from us. That's what he's saying. What matters? A good name. You'll pile all this money up, and my goodness, the Lord may call you home, and then whose money is it? Will he spend it wisely? Will it even be good for him? You know, some people can take an inheritance and manage it and do pretty good and not lose themselves. And some people can get in trouble with it. I knew a young man that lost his father. Accident. They decided to pay him and take his lawsuit money is what it amounted to over a period of 20 years. He got a pretty good little check every year for 20 years. You know what that young man did for 20 years? He sat and waited on that check. He wouldn't even work. He didn't have to. He just played. And I knew him pretty good because he married some of my kinfolk. My goodness, what a mess. If he hadn't have got that money, the young man had a future working at the plants. He'd have done all right. Some people can't manage it. So why are we piling it up at our own expense to let someone use it in a way wrong? Unless God gives us sometimes the ability, it is all for naught. How do we even know? Let's look a little further. Jesus was touching on this subject, and I throw this verse in here. He's talking here about the certain rich man. What did he say? And I say unto my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and marry. Jesus was telling this story. But God said unto him, thou foolest not, thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall these things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and not rich toward God. The question for us, are we rich toward God? That's the question. That's where Solomon's pushing us with this. What matters? Your name matters. A good reputation finds honor before God and men, and after death. See, I told you Solomon's looking at the big picture. We just sitting down here worried about today or tomorrow or next week. Solomon's looking way on down the road. He's looking down the road when we stand before the great I Am and have to give account of what we did while we're down here. That's what he's doing. Hebrews, the 11th chapter, is a book in the Bible where the writer in Hebrews was pointing out the men of old, the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. All of those men, those great men, and all the things they had done, and they did it. How did they do what they did? Can anybody tell me? There's a word. What? Faith. By faith, they did some wonderful things way back yonder. And I got the wrong verse up there. Never done that before, have I? Boy, it didn't take long to fix that, did it? Just one more button. I'm going to go back to the other verse, though. It says here, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We understand that. But that's the lead-in to what he says next. For by it the elders obtained a good report. A good report. That's what that good name is all about. A good report. A good name's worth more than money. Here, those men of old, Hebrews 11th chapter, obtained a good report by what they did with the Word of God. That's how they got there. The next verse down there is toward the end of it. And these things have obtained a good report through faith, receive not the promise. They never saw Jesus Christ on the cross. All before that time. But by faith they obeyed God. And they obtained a good report through faith. I'm going to go back and look at that verse. What is that about? He says here in Solomon, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun and is common among men. A man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul, all that he hath desired, yet God gave him not power. Why did he give him not power? Because he died. To eat thereof, but a stranger eateth. This is vanity and is an evil disease. I've seen people who spent their life gathering up some money so they could retire and be well off in their retirement and die, and all of that money went to somebody else. That's what that verse there is addressing. So just think about that. You want a good name? or you want riches? Solomon says that good name's what matters. Let's go a little further here. If our names are written in heaven, going back to that good report of those men of old, Hebrews, the 11th chapter, notwithstanding in this rejoice not. This verse here is Jesus talking to the 70 who had just returned from their going out and reaching out, and they were all excited because the powers that had been imparted to them had caused even the spirits to be subject to what they were teaching them. And they were excited about that. Man, they were just all ecstatic. Look, even the spirits are listening to us. And Jesus says, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Notwithstanding in this, rejoice not that the spirits are subject unto you. But let me tell you what to be excited about. But rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. See, there's what matters. There's what matters. A good report. Our names written in heaven. Philippians 4:3, the same thing. And I entreat thee also, true fellow, help those women which labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and with my other fellow laborers, whose names are written in the book of life. That's what matters. If you have a little money jingle in your pocket when you die, so be it. But be sure you have a good name. Be sure of that. That's what matters. And we'll move on to something else. Oh, let's see what else the preacher has to tell us. And we're going to catch that in the second half of verse 1. And let's check that out. Your death day is better than your birthday. That's what he said. We already know he's the wisest man on earth. At that time, everybody looked up to him. So there's something to this. We don't like to talk about this, do we? Some serious thinking here. I've been to the hospital when both of my children were born. It was a pretty ecstatic situation. Happy. Whole hall full of family wanting to come in and hold the baby. I still remember my mama. She was at the door knocking, and she kind of cracked that door open and said, now you just remember, he's part mine. Talking about that baby, she wanted to hold him. He's part mine. And I'll never forget her saying that. I said, well, you're right. That's right. Oh, boy. Solomon says a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Now, how do you figure he's thinking there? What do you think's going on in his mind? Huh? Well, yeah. That's right. Now, you hear what he said? He said, if you got that good name. This is conditional. That death day is a good day if you got that good name. It's conditional. That is true. That is true. Let's look at some things that we ought to think about. Of course, this assumes that you have a good name, that your name is written in the book of life. Okay. The day of one's birth, really in a lot of ways, is the beginning of a lot of sorrow. And the Bible talks about that. Let's read a few things from Mr. Job. We all know Mr. Job. What did he say? Man that is born of a woman is a few days and full of trouble. Wow. Kind of born into some problems. 1:3 says, after this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Job was tried in pretty tough things. Lost his family and everything he had and done it, and it all happened pretty quick. He got tested pretty tough. But he stood the test. That's important. But the point here is that life is not downhill with the wind. Sometimes there's some uphill in the rain or the snow or whatever you want to conjure up, or here in a hurricane for that matter, life is not always a breeze. And that's just the way it is. That's a reality. It's tough. Jeremiah has I hope I can squeeze this in here. Let's see. This is what Jeremiah the prophet had to say. And he had a tough time. He had a whole bunch of people that wouldn't listen to him. Well, look at what he says. Cursed be the day when I was born. Let not the day wherein my mother bare me be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought tidings to my father, saying, a man-child is born unto thee, making him very glad. And let that man be as the cities which the Lord overthrew, and repented not. And let him hear the cry in the morning, and the shouting at noontide. Because he slew me not from the womb, or that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb be always great with me. Wherefore came I forth out of the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame. That boy had an attitude, didn't he? And it wasn't a good one when this was penned. He had a tough time. There is some crooks in the road. It's not always just straight shooting. Sometimes you got to slow down and negotiate issues. I've traveled out west a time or two, and man, I've hit some roads out there. When you're leaving town, this is in New Mexico, you see the next town, and it's 20 miles. And you can see the water tower. Well, there's the next town right there. How far? 20 miles. Well, I see it. There it is. And I've been in places like Arkansas and up in Missouri and sometimes in Tennessee where you drive about 35 miles an hour and you're going around the curve and you don't know what you're fixing to meet next. That's just life. That's the way it is. And these guys had a tough time. Your death day is better. But for the righteous, here's where we're going. The day of one's death is the beginning of eternal bliss. Is that what Solomon had in mind? Are you looking at the big picture? Are you looking at the big picture? He ain't looking at tomorrow or the next day. He's looking all the way down the line. And that's what he wants us to do. That's important. In Isaiah 57, if that's the one that comes up, I'm not sure anymore. Look at here, man, a blind hog found an acorn. Under Manasseh, he was pretty much a tyrant. There were some tough things going on with God's people. And this is penned by Isaiah. The righteous perish, and no man layeth it to heart, and merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. Listen to that now. The righteous is taken away from the evil to come. He shall enter into peace. They shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his uprightness. Now, Manasseh was killing a lot of the people. And this may be describing the fact that all of those who were faithful to God, if he killed them, they went to a place of bliss. They are actually better off. That's what Isaiah is describing here for us, okay? So think about what Solomon said. The death day is better than your birthday. Oh, yeah. What did Paul say on the same angle there? For me to live is Christ, okay, and to die is a negative? No, he said it's a positive. It's a gain. Kind of what Solomon was saying. Our death day is better than our birthday. I'm going home to be with Jesus. That's what Paul's talking about. Right? Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Oh, maybe that's what Mr. Solomon was inferring. I believe so. It is good to be born, but better to die and go to Abraham's bosom. And I believe that's what Solomon was inferring. Let's go somewhere else. We're talking about paradoxical situations. Look what he says next. A funeral is better than a party. Is that right? Well, yeah, you know it's right. The Bible says so. We're not going to argue with that, are we? But you know, our first off-the-cuff thinking, if you throw out to just anybody, they'd say, what? Are you sure a funeral is better than a party? Let me tell you about parties. My son come through last week. He's got a little girl, 2 years old in February. So she's 2 years and 3 months or whatever. Y'all do the math. Anyway, somebody had bought a cake and it was sitting up on the counter and she saw that cake. Now, she had her Christmas right here a few months ago. Christmas, presents, party. People come in. Wasn't no family, but there's a lot of soldiers got together. She saw that cake, and I don't know who it was, and they ain't got a clue why, but somebody walked through the house with a roll of Christmas wrapping paper. And I don't know if they're moving it out of a closet or what they're doing with it, but that little girl saw that roll of Christmas wrapping paper. She put that together with that cake and said, party! And she was running through the house going, party, presents. She's 2 years old. She wouldn't think that a funeral was better than a party, would she? Had to tone that down, make that wrapping paper go away. I don't know why it was out, don't know. But she decided she was fixing to have a party. That's what she decided. Oh, boy, everybody loves a party, but Solomon thinks, listen to me, boys. Solomon thinks that it's a good idea to go to a funeral. That's what he says. I wonder why. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. Everybody likes a party. I like a party. But Solomon said in the big picture, stay with me now. That's important. This is how I frame this thing. Keep it clear. This is sobering. Let's see what else he has to say. It is better to go to the house of mourning than go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men. Focus on that. And the living will lay it to his heart. When we go to the funeral, we are reminded that that is our destiny. It is sobering. It places us, if we really think about it, in a somber frame of thinking. And periodically, we need to be reminded because we forget. I know of people who won't take their children to a funeral. They think, don't have no business there. I would think Solomon would suggest, now I recognize there's an age. Well, you pick you an age. A little guy may get confused. But when they get old enough, them boys and younger, they need to be reminded. In fact, I'm going to tell you this. Who do you think what family ever called everybody together for a funeral? What family? I don't know of anybody that ever said, hey, y'all come over. We're thinking about having a funeral. No, that's not how it works. What happens is God reaches down there and calls the end on somebody like he's going to call it on us. And I think it was part of his plan because he knows then we'll all run together. And there'll be people at a funeral that might be the only time they ever been in a church house. Might be. I've had the opportunity, I'll call it that, to preach funeral in a lot of different places. And I tend to try to consider the audience. I've preached funerals for people that I'm quite sure that was maybe one of the 4 or 5 times that particular individual had ever been in the church house. What are you going to say? What are you going to say? Oh, yeah. You got nieces and nephews out there that knew that individual. I don't know them. But them nieces and nephews do. And if you say things like, well, they in heaven now with grandma so-and-so, their nieces and nephews says, well, I ain't got a problem then because I know what kind of person they were. You have to be careful about that. A funeral is a place that we go to get reset our thinking, and God calls the funerals, okay? He knew we'd come together. He called them. He wants to remind us. He keeps a steady reminder of what's going on. You, one of these days, will be in that casket. That's the end of all man. We will all die and face the judgment. And the living, it says, will take it to heart. The living will lay it to his heart. That's why it's important that they go there. The sober thinking individual will consider where he's at and what's going on. And he will consider, what should I do? Do I need to make some changes? Do I need to make preparations for my time in the casket? That's what he'll do. And that's what Solomon is talking about here. That's what he's trying to do. Yeah, we can celebrate a birthday, but you'll learn more at a funeral than you will at a party. He's not against parties. That's not his point. A funeral reminds us of the brevity of life, the eventuality of death. It forces us to consider and encourages us to prepare for it. And that's important. In this same angle, he says something else. I'm pretty sure he says something else. I'm just not sure where it's at right now. There it is. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance of the heart is made better. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. Think about that a minute. Now he's talking about the heart that responds to God's commands, that drives us to do right and wrong. He's not talking about the blood pumping muscle. He's talking about who we are. He's saying that sadness and sorrow is good for our hearts. Interesting. In Hebrews, the 12th chapter, 11th verse, he says, now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. What did he just say? He said, anytime you get in trouble or somebody fusses at you, it don't seem like a good thing because it's not. That's what he said. But look what he says. Nevertheless, afterward, it yieldeth. See, we're looking for what do we get from it? It yielded the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. What did the Hebrew writer tell us? He said, every now and a little spanking does us good. That's what he says. And that's what Solomon was referring to. He said when he's talking about that funeral rather than the party. Okay, that's what's being talked about. So keep that in mind. Discipline is never pleasant at the time, but the outgrowth of it can be a positive, and that's the point of it. Laughter provides a temporary reprieve from the burdens of life, but sorrow encourages us to make positive changes, and that's what Solomon is after, the big picture. Keep in mind the big picture. For this reason, the wise person can often be found in a funeral parlor, and the fool will be down partying. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise. What are you going to hear at a party? And what are you going to hear at a funeral? At a party, it'll be shallow and foolish. At a funeral, done right, it'll be edifying. It'll cause you to stop and think and consider your situation. Are you ready? What changes do you need to make? Wisdom will be imparted at a funeral, goodness knows what at a party. The rebuke of the wise at a funeral, the party, the song of fools. The ideal of crackling of thorns under a pot. What he's drawing from there is they got a pot out there. They want to build a fire under it to cook something. And he used thorns, which are small and in their size. They're not big. You light a fire with them. They pop and snap as they burn up, but they burn up very quickly. And they really don't ever get hot long enough to cook any food. But they do make a little noise until they burn up. In other words, not much value. And that is the ideal there. Let's go a little further. Y'all had enough of this? We're not going to get too much further, I guess. The end is better than the beginning. I like it. The end is better than the beginning. Ecclesiastes 7:8, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. How in the world is this so? We've already talked about one's death is better than one's birth in 7:1, and that ideal is sort of in play here, but it's a little bit more than that. The principle has application more than to just our lives. Really, it does. How many projects have you started, good projects, well-intended projects that you started, and they're still sitting on the workbench or wherever? How many? Okay. So those are clearly fall in this, don't they? The end is better than the beginning. It is when they are finished that we can truly look back and say, wow, that was a good thing. Many things begin with grief and difficulty, only to end in peace and prosperity. Psalmist said this in 126:5-6. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come home with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. We sing a song about bringing in the sheaves, don't we? Life here on this earth is tough, and sometimes we get stall out on projects we well intend to try to finish, if we're talking about church work or anything else. But the end is better than the beginning, and we can take it to the end of life. When we're born and come into this old earth, we're just a work in play. All through our life, God is trying to straighten us out and line us out, giving us all kinds of challenges, giving us all kinds of breaks. He wants us to come home and be with him in heaven. That's what he wants. And some of us make it across the finish line and some don't. But if we want to think about it as we being the work, that applies as well. If our work here on earth truly meets up with God's requirements to go home with him, then there's no doubt that the end is better than the beginning. Patience better than pride. This is an easy one. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than proud in spirit. I don't think there's a one of us that would argue this angle, and I think we all generally understand it. Patience is better than pride. Pride is evil and is of the world. The Bible's clear about this. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts. How many of y'all committed adultery lately? Or fornication? How many murders we got out there? Well, how many thieves? This seems kind of foolish, but where I'm going with this is Some sins are kind of public and out there. We tend to avoid them pretty good, don't we? What about some of them that's not as public, you know? All right. Covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye. Blasphemy. How about pride? Let me tell you, as I understand this verse, you'll go to hell just as fast for murder as you will for pride. Am I right? They're listed together. There's no distinction made in these verses, in this verse, that distinguishes one as number one and one as number two. Is there? So I'm going to say that pride is right in there a problem. Foolishness and all of these evil things come from within and defile the man. Within is man. God has nothing to do with this. Let's look a little further. I think I have another. Yeah, 1 John 2:16. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. So pride is an issue. Patience is better than pride. Why is patience better? Well, like I said, this is an easy one. My wife tells me that I'm not as patient as I ought to be. So I fight this thing, patience, but pride doesn't get in the way so much. Patience, though, it does. I have to work on that. Talking about patience, y'all remember James Kimball? He was a very interesting person, very wise person. He was not a big something. It was pretty clipped. And he come across sometimes to people as not being very patient. And one time, someone kind of collared him about not being patient. He says, all I can say is, if you don't think I'm patient, you ought to see me when I don't try. And I think there's truth in that for all of us, okay? But we are talking about pride here and counterbalancing it with patience. Pride leads to contention and destruction. I want to show you a jewel of a little verse, and I want you to, where am I at? Patience is a virtue. We hadn't got there yet. I'm ahead of myself. Let's read this one. But thou, O God, man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness. That the aged men, that's a description of people, Christian people there that Paul's talking to Titus about. He says the aged men to be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, in charity, and in patience. There's where I think I need more work. But why patience rather than pride? Like I said, it's easy. But look at that first verse. Isn't that interesting? Jewel of a little verse found in Proverbs, probably Solomon, because he's credited with Proverbs, but I don't think he wrote it all. Only by pride cometh contention. Now, let me help you with that. If you got an issue with somebody and you can't get past it, your problem is pride. That's what that verse says. And pride will do what on Judgment Day? Condemn us. But with a well-advised is wisdom. Proverbs 16:18, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proud people just fall off the edge. They don't get a handle on it. Ecclesiastes 9:7, here's what Solomon had to say. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Think about that. Patience, on the other hand, is indicative of wisdom and necessary for salvation. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly. Romans 2:7, to them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory and honor and immortality and eternal life. Boy, extolling patience. Hebrews 10:36, for ye have need of patience, that after you have done the will of God, you might receive the promise. Boy, he just laid it out there. Patience, there it is. This is a pretty easy one. We all struggle with pride, some more than others. And if you have an issue with a brother, pride's the problem. And beware. All right, let's go somewhere else. The present is better than the past. I'm not going to finish. But we'll finish this one. Present is better than the past. That's what Solomon said. Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these, for thou doest not inquire wisely concerning this. How many times have you heard somebody say, whoa, the good old days? And Solomon says, hold on. Hold on. Were the good old days really that good? Sometimes our problem is faulty memory. Or we are dwelling on some particular thing. And I think I can look back and see when some aspects of the good old days, and there's those in here older than me. But I remember. Fella told you he's going to do something. You know what happened? He did it. And he didn't need 47 pages signed and credited by a lawyer to make you do it in a courtroom. There's something has changed there. I believe that. Of course, that was the culture I was raised up in. You might go 100 miles north or 100 miles west and you found a little different culture. I don't know, but that was the culture I was in. And there's aspects of my childhood that I think would do us all good if they were here today. I really do. But I think I get what Solomon is talking about here. The present is better than the past. We often bemoan how things were better back then. Handshakes, honest, careful to protect our name and our honor. Those things were important. And now people, I don't know, they trash themselves. They really do. They don't pay their bills or, you get into that kind of stuff all the time. It's interesting. Why one is not wise in thinking like this, as Solomon says. Memory is one of the reasons. We just flat forget. I'll tell you something else I remember. I remember a two-holer. And not as an option. It was that or else. So, let's be real. Some things, our memory kind of gets away. Even if one experiences trials in the present, there is reason to rejoice. That's what James tells us now, and that's where we're fixing to go. Let's see if I'm right on that. I never know. Oh, boy, look at here. James 1, verse 2. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. Aren't we trying to get better so we can go to heaven? Isn't that the point? Maybe that's what Solomon was thinking about. And look at what James is saying. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. What is problems before us that we might be dealing with doing to us and doing for us? They're making us better if we're responding properly. We're better off for it. We're better today than we was yesterday and the day before that. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. And you have an obligation to do everything you can to better yourself, better oneself. The ideal, maybe that's what Mr. Solomon had in mind. Maybe so. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended. Paul here is talking about heaven, going home. He's not there yet. That's one thing I do. What's he going to do? What's he going to do on his way to heaven? He says, I'm going to forget. He ain't looking back. I'm going to forget. Why wouldn't he look back? Not very pretty, is it? Why, he persecuted Christians. He denied the Christ. He did all kind of things. And then when he became a Christian, he was whipped and scourged and stoned and shipwrecked. Looking back, I don't think so. Look at what he says. Forget the things which are behind. Why? Because they'll interfere with his ability to forge ahead and do everything he can for the Christ. And I believe that's true with us. We look back, we get hung up on it, and we get negative and get sired. Wait a minute. Maybe Solomon's on to something. The present is better than the past. Maybe we ought to think like that. And I'm out of time. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good point. You hear? We cannot change the past. He's right. But we have the future yet to do with. Maybe Solomon had that in mind too. Good point. Thank you for that. All right. This is not the end of my talk, but I'm going to quit because I'm out of time and I don't get fired. We might get fired here. But we'll just end right there. And that's some of the things that you can learn sitting at the feet of a wise person, okay? And that's never a bad thing. I challenge you to go home and read the next few verses. They'll do much the same, and they'll cause you to think. Because what Solomon wants us to see, he's preparing you and getting you ready. The big picture. We get caught up in the superficial, and I don't mean that in an ugly way, but we really do. We worried about tonight, tomorrow, the next day. We need to look a little further and think about the big picture. That's what Solomon was doing. So if you're here tonight, subject to the invitation anyway, we'll extend that. While together we encourage you to stand and sing. Brother Logan, lead us in a song.
Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you worry from the victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood. In the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be free from your passion and pride? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. From the foreign to Calvary's side. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood. In the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you service for Jesus your King? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you live daily his praises to sing? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood. In the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb.
Brother Ron, will you lead us in closing prayer?